This is the story of Ignaz Semmelweis, the man history would call the savior of mothers. It's a story of brilliance and perseverance, of a discovery that could have saved countless lives if only the world had listened. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll journey through Semmelweis's life, from his humble beginnings to the dramatic moment of discovery, through the bitter opposition he faced, and finally to the tragedy of his decline and the triumph of his legacy. Prepare for a tale of hope, despair, and ultimate redemption, set against the backdrop of 19th century medicine. Chapter 1: The Making of a Healer. Ignaz Semmelweis's story begins far from the grand hospitals of Vienna. He was born in 1818 in the city of Buda, part of today's Budapest in Hungary. His father was a prosperous spice merchant, and young Ignaz grew up in a bustling household as the 5th of 10 children. In the narrow, cobbled streets of Buda, he learned the values of hard work and education. His parents hoped he would become a lawyer or a civil servant, a respectable career for a bright young man from a well-to-do family. Dutifully, Ignaz enrolled in law school in Vienna in 1837. But his heart wasn't in legal codes and courtroom debates. Vienna in the 1830s was also a world capital of medicine, alive with new scientific ideas, and the young Semmelweis found himself drawn to it like a moth to flame. He would sneak away from his law lectures to wander the halls of the medical campus, peeking into anatomy classrooms with wide-eyed fascination. One afternoon, Ignaz found himself standing quietly at the back of a crowded lecture theater. At the front, a surgeon carefully demonstrated the intricacies of the human heart, its chambers exposed, its rhythms explained. As the professor's voice echoed through the hall, describing how this vital organ pumps life through our veins, Ignaz watched in awe. The sight of the heart laid bare, the delicate precision of the demonstration, and the revelation of how the human body functioned stirred something deep within him. His pulse quickened. In that moment, he knew this is where he belonged. Semmelweis abandons his law studies and switches to medicine. He dives into his new calling with determination. At the University of Vienna's medical school, he proves to be an attentive, curious student. He soaks up knowledge under some of Europe's finest physicians and scientists. By 1844, at the age of 26, Ignaz Semmelweis graduates with a doctorate in medicine. Freshly minted, Dr. Semmelweis is eager to begin his career. He hopes to specialize in internal medicine, but no positions open up in that field. Instead, he finds an opportunity in a different department, obstetrics, the field of childbirth. In the 1840s, obstetrics is not the most prestigious path. Many doctors shy away from it because of the terrifying mortality rates of new mothers. But for Ignaz, this is a chance to make a difference where it's needed most. In 1846, at the Vienna General Hospital, one of the largest and most respected teaching hospitals in Europe, the young Dr. Semmelweis receives his first appointment. He becomes an assistant physician in the first obstetrical clinic under Professor Johann Klein. Stepping into the maternity ward for the first time, Dr. Semmelweis feels both excitement and trepidation. The air is thick with the smell of soap and something more ominous, the metallic tang of illness. All around him, beds are filled with women who have just given birth. Some smile weakly at their newborns, but many lie still and feverish. Nurses and midwives move about with hushed urgency. This is the world Ignaz Semmelweis is entering, a world where bringing new life into being is shadowed by the constant threat of death. The young doctor steels himself. He has no idea that in these very halls he will soon uncover a truth that could change everything. Chapter 2. The Deadly Puzzle. Dr. Semmelweis throws himself into his new duties in the maternity clinic. It doesn't take long for him to notice a terrifying pattern. The clinic he works in, the first obstetrical clinic, staffed by physicians and medical students, has a far higher rate of childbed fever deaths than the second clinic across the courtyard, which is run by midwives. Women beg on their knees not to be admitted to the first clinic. Some even prefer giving birth on the street rather than risk the dreaded doctor's ward. Semmelweis is determined to understand why. Day after day, he pores over patient records, keeping meticulous notes. 2 clinics under the same roof, with the same layout, admitting similar patients. Yet in one, the mothers die at an alarming rate, and in the other, far fewer fall ill. Why? He examines every theory he can think of. Could overcrowding be to blame? The wards are equally crowded. The climate. Both clinics are in the same building. He even considers superstition. In the first clinic, a priest would walk through the halls, ringing a bell when delivering last rites to dying women. Perhaps the sound terrified already weakened patients. In a bizarre experiment, Semmelweis has the priest change his route and silence the bell, but it makes no difference. The young doctor grows more frustrated and haunted, pacing the corridors in search of the invisible killer. Late one evening in early 1847, Semmelweis sits in his dim office, surrounded by stacks of hospital reports, The lamplight flickers as he rubs his eyes. So many numbers, so many dead. He refuses to give up. Then, fate intervenes with a tragic clue. One day, a sudden accident shattered the routine at the hospital. Professor Jakub Kolečka, a respected colleague and close friend of Semmelweis, was accidentally cut on the finger by a student's scalpel during an autopsy. At first, it seemed like a minor injury, but within days, Kolečka developed a severe infection. He burned with fever, suffered intense pain, and despite all attempts to treat him, he died. In the aftermath, Semmelweis sat with the autopsy report, grieving and searching for understanding. As he read through the medical findings, he was struck by something chilling. The symptoms and internal damage in Kolečka's body were nearly identical to those he had observed in the mothers who had died of childbed fever. In that moment of realization, the pieces of the puzzle snapped into place. The same disease had killed them all, and its source had been within the hospital walls. In that devastating moment, Ignaz Semmelweis finds the answer that had eluded him. The doctors and students, himself included, have been performing autopsies on the victims of childbed fever every morning, dissecting infected corpses, and then, with barely a wipe of their hands, going straight to examine healthy mothers in labor. They were the carriers of death, unwittingly passing infectious material, cadaverous particles, he calls it, from the dead to the living. At once, Semmelweis acts on his discovery. He orders all doctors and students in his ward to scrub their hands thoroughly in a solution of chlorinated lime, a strong bleaching agent, before touching any patient. The chlorinated lime wash, he reasons, will destroy the invisible poison from the corpses. His colleagues are skeptical, some even offended at the suggestion that they could be causing the infections. But Semmelweis is insistent. He stands by the wash basins, making sure everyone follows the new protocol, no exceptions. At first, many of the doctors and medical students grumbled under their breath. The strong smell of the chlorinated lime solution lingered on their hands, and some scoffed at the idea that they could be the cause of the infections. The notion that their own actions might be endangering patients was difficult to accept. But under Semmelweis's unwavering supervision, they followed the new protocol. Day after day, they scrubbed their hands before examining patients. And then, something extraordinary happened. The death toll in the first clinic began to drop rapidly. Mothers who only weeks before might have succumbed to fever now recovered and left the hospital with their babies in their arms. Semmelweis meticulously tracked the numbers. The results were undeniable. Where 1 in 6 mothers had once died, nearly all now survived. Within 2 months of implementing the hand-washing policy, the maternal mortality rate fell from around 18% to under 2%. For a time, not a single woman in the clinic died of childbed fever. The transformation was astonishing. A quiet revolution born from soap, water, and unwavering conviction. The change was so profound, even the nurses began to take notice. For the first time in memory, not a single mother had been lost in an entire week. Semmelweis walked the ward in quiet awe, observing mothers peacefully recovering beside their healthy newborns. The dread that once hung over the clinic had lifted. In that moment, he felt a surge of relief and joy. The solution had been so simple: hand washing. Yet its impact was immense. He had uncovered the key to stopping the silent killer, at least within the walls of his own clinic. The invisible enemy had been driven out by cleanliness, vigilance, and a relentless pursuit of truth. For the first time, Semmelweis allows himself to celebrate. He writes up the results, preparing to tell the wider medical world of his life-saving discovery. He is sure that once his fellow doctors see this evidence, they will embrace the practice of hand washing. And childbed fever will become a rarity. Little does he know, the real fight is only beginning. Chapter 3. The Backlash. In the summer of 1848, within a grand lecture hall in Vienna, Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis stood before a gathering of esteemed physicians. With passionate urgency, he presented the results from his clinic, evidence that hand-washing with chlorinated lime had drastically reduced maternal deaths. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of a man pleading not for praise, but for change. But instead of curiosity or commendation, he faced an impenetrable wall of silence. The audience sat rigid, arms crossed, expressions unmoved. His words, simple, logical, life-saving, were met not with acceptance, but with offense. To them, the implications were unthinkable. The suggestion that they, the guardians of health, might be the very agents of death, carrying infection from autopsy rooms to delivery beds, was too painful to entertain. His findings, however clear, struck at the core of their pride and tradition. And in that moment, instead of embracing the truth, many chose denial. A rumble of disapproval sweeps through the audience. Semmelweis opens his mouth to answer, but the doctors are already shaking their heads. To many, the idea is an affront, an accusation that their revered practices have been harming patients. His superior, Professor Klein, sits frowning, arms crossed. Others murmur that Semmelweis's results must be a fluke or due to some other hidden cause. In the months that follow, Ignaz Semmelweis finds himself increasingly isolated. Despite the success in his own ward, the senior staff at the Vienna hospital refuse to implement his hand-washing protocol elsewhere. Some younger doctors admire him, but they have little influence. Professor Klein, uncomfortable with Semmelweis's challenges to authority, makes no effort to keep him on staff. In March 1849, Semmelweis's 2-year appointment is allowed to lapse. A rival physician, who does not believe in the hand-washing theory, is chosen to replace him. Heartbroken and angry, Semmelweis packs his bags and leaves Vienna. Without him there to champion it, the chlorine hand-washing practice is gradually abandoned at the hospital. Soon, the deadly fever creeps back into the wards, and the cycle of loss resumes, a fact that weighs heavily on Ignaz as he departs the city that was both the site of his greatest triumph and his deepest disappointment. Semmelweis returns to his homeland, Hungary. In 1851, he accepts a humble position running the maternity ward at a small hospital in Pest, the eastern half of Budapest. It's an unpaid honorary post, a far cry from the prestigious halls of Vienna, but Ignaz seizes it as an opportunity to prove his methods anew. Almost immediately, Semmelweis enforces strict hand-washing and cleanliness in his Pest clinic. The results are spectacular. Over the next years, the mortality rate in his ward drops to less than 1%. Mothers stop dying under his care, just as they had in Vienna. Word spreads among Hungarian doctors, and this time some listen. In 1855, Semmelweis is appointed professor of obstetrics at the University of Pest. By now, Ignaz has also found personal happiness. In 1857, he marries a young woman named Maria Weidenhofer. The wedding is a bright spot in an otherwise tumultuous life. Ignaz smiles in his wedding portrait, a rare moment of joy. Over the next few years, he becomes a father, welcoming 5 children. Colleagues in Budapest respect him, and the Hungarian government even issues a directive that all obstetric units in the country should adopt Semmelweis's hand-washing methods. It seems as if his discovery is finally gaining the recognition it deserves, at least at home. Yet beyond Hungary's borders, Semmelweis's battle is far from over. The wider medical community continues to reject or ignore his findings. Influential doctors in Vienna, Paris, and London remain unconvinced. Some openly ridicule him. A leading Vienna medical journal scoffs at the nonsense of chlorine hand wash, insisting his idea is absurd. Each time Ignaz hears of another needless death from childbed fever abroad, he feels a stab of outrage and grief. How can he celebrate his success when countless mothers elsewhere still die? Semmelweis decides that if the medical establishment will not come to him, he will go to them. He will spend the next phase of his life fighting to convince the world of his life-saving discovery, no matter what it takes. Chapter 4. Descent into Darkness. By the early 1860s, Ignaz Semmelweis is a man on a mission, and a man under strain. Years have passed since Vienna, yet the broader medical world still refuses to heed his message. Semmelweis, now in his 40s, decides to take his case directly to the skeptics. In 1861, he publishes a comprehensive book detailing his evidence. The etiology, concept, and prophylaxis of childbed fever. Page after page of data, case studies, and passionate argument, a lifetime of work, are laid out for all to see. He sent copies to medical leaders across Europe, confident that the truth can no longer be ignored. But the silence that comes back is devastating. Many physicians simply dismiss the book. Others attack his ideas outright. Semmelweis's frustration boils over into fury. How can they reject facts while women continue to die? He begins writing fiery open letters to prominent obstetricians, letters that radiate anger and despair. In his desperation, Semmelweis turned to the written word, sending letters to prominent physicians across Europe. In them, he pleaded, sometimes begged, for his peers to adopt hand-washing. His tone, once measured and scholarly, became increasingly impassioned and accusatory. He implored them to act swiftly, warning that every hour of inaction meant more needless deaths. As the letters continued, his language grew even more severe. He began to denounce respected colleagues as willfully blind, even labeling some as irresponsible murderers. These words sent shockwaves through the medical community. Allies who once stood beside him began to pull away. And at home, those closest to him, his wife, his friends, watched with growing concern. The emotional burden of being unheard while mothers continued to die was taking its toll. Semmelweis, once a brilliant and driven physician, now seemed consumed by frustration and sorrow, as if haunted by every life that might have been saved. By 1865, Semmelweis's behavior has grown alarming. Some accounts say he wanders the streets of Budapest, muttering about blood-soaked hands and dying mothers. Others note he has become paranoid, drinking heavily and alienating his colleagues. His worried wife and a few loyal friends consult with doctors about how to help him. Unbeknownst to Ignaz, plans are made to commit him to a psychiatric institution in hopes that rest and treatment might restore his peace of mind. One summer day in July 1865, a close colleague, Dr. Ferdinand Hebra, invites Semmelweis on a carriage ride suggesting they visit a new medical institute on the outskirts of Vienna, an institute he'd surely find interesting. Grateful for what he believed was a friendly outing, Semmelweis climbed into the carriage alongside a trusted colleague. The journey was quiet, the mood seemingly light. But as the carriage came to a halt in front of a large gated building, unease began to settle over him. The structure loomed with a colored stillness, and the moment he stepped inside, something felt off. The corridors were too quiet. The air, heavy with silence, offered no signs of a welcoming institution. What had been described to him as a medical institute was in truth the Döbling Asylum, the Viennese mental hospital. As the truth dawned on him, 2 attendants appeared from down the hall. Their expression and posture left no doubt. This was not a visit. It was a commitment. Panic surged through Semmelweis. He realized he had been deceived. His protests, his insistence that he was sane, that he was a doctor, went unheard. He struggled against their grip, but the decision had already been made. In that moment, the healer became the captive, betrayed by those he once trusted most. The attendants seize him. In the struggle, Ignaz suffers a gash on his right hand. They drag him into a cell and lock the door. Behind the barred window, Semmelweis is overwhelmed with betrayal and terror. He pounds on the door until his fists bleed and his voice is hoarse. No one comes, except the asylum guards who restrain him. Accounts tell of cruel treatments. He is beaten when he resists, dunked into icy baths, and dosed with castor oil purges, barbaric remedies of the era meant to cure disturbed minds. Ignaz Semmelweis spends only 2 weeks in that miserable place. On August 13th, 1865, he dies there, alone and confined, far from the patients whose lives he had saved. The official cause is septicemia, blood poisoning, from the infected wound on his hand. In a final, bitter irony, the champion of cleanliness perished from the very kind of infection he fought so hard to prevent. The savior of mothers was killed by childbed fever itself. Semmelweis is just 47 years old. His wife, heartbroken, brings his body back to Budapest for burial. Only a handful of mourners attend his funeral. News of his death barely makes a ripple in the medical journals of the time. To most of his contemporaries, Ignaz Semmelweis died as a tragic, misunderstood figure, a genius unappreciated, a voice crying out in the wilderness of stubborn tradition. Chapter 5: Legacy of the Savior of Mothers. Ignaz Semmelweis did not live to see the vindication of his ideas, but within a few years of his tragic death, the world of medicine began to change. In the late 1860s, French scientist Louis Pasteur formally proved that microscopic germs cause infections, providing the theoretical explanation Semmelweis lacked. Surgeons like Joseph Lister built on Pasteur's work and introduced antiseptic practices in hospitals. When Lister began using carbolic acid to sterilize wounds and instruments, post-surgical infection rates plummeted, just as Semmelweis's hand-washing had reduced childbed fever. The medical community, at last, had to accept the truth. Cleanliness and hand disinfection save lives. Semmelweis's once ridiculed ideas eventually became fundamental principles of medicine. Doctors around the world started scrubbing their hands and cleaning their tools as standard practice. The maternity deaths that had devastated hospitals in Semmelweis's time grew far rarer. Years later, Joseph Lister himself acknowledged Semmelweis's contribution, saying, "I think with the greatest admiration of him and his achievement, and it fills me with joy that at last he is given the respect due to him." Today, every medical student is taught the importance of hand hygiene from day one. Every time a doctor or nurse washes their hands before an exam or surgery, they are carrying forward Semmelweis's legacy, often without even knowing his name. In Budapest, the National Medical University proudly bears the name Semmelweis. Statues stand in his honor, and historians now rightly recognize him as a pioneer of antiseptic medicine. He is remembered around the world as the savior of mothers. In the 21st century, a global pandemic brought renewed attention to the simple act of hand washing. In March 2020, a special Google Doodle, an illustration on the Google homepage, featured Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis demonstrating proper hand-washing technique. It was a tribute to the doctor who had been over 150 years ahead of his time. At long last, millions of people were learning the lesson that Semmelweis had tried so desperately to teach. Clean hands can save lives. The story of Ignaz Semmelweis is both heartbreaking and inspiring. He faced ridicule, loneliness, and tragedy, yet his vision eventually transformed the world. His legacy lives on every time we lather up with soap and water to protect someone from infection. Generations of mothers and babies have been spared the horror of childbed fever because one man had the courage to speak the truth and to keep speaking it, even when no one would listen. In the end, the world did catch up with Dr. Semmelweis, and for that, we all owe a debt of gratitude to the savior of mothers. Ignaz Semmelweis, the life and legacy of the savior of mothers. In this episode, we uncover the extraordinary yet heartbreaking story of a man whose contributions to medicine were revolutionary, but whose legacy went largely unrecognized during his lifetime. We follow the life of Ignaz Semmelweis, a pioneer who defied the medical establishment to save mothers from a deadly disease. His journey will take us from the candle-lit wards of 19th century hospitals to the dark corridors of rejection and tragedy. Prepare to experience history not just as fact, but as emotion, passion, and ultimate redemption. The Unseen Killer. In the mid-19th century, a silent and invisible killer stalks the maternity wards of Europe. In overcrowded hospital rooms, lit by flickering oil lamps, the joy of childbirth is often followed by dread. Mothers who should be cradling their newborns instead lie feverish and pale, their lives slipping away. The scourge of puerperal fever, childbed fever, haunts these halls, claiming one new mother after another. In some hospitals, nearly 1 in every 4 mothers will not survive to hold her baby. But one young doctor refuses to accept that nothing can be done. In 1847, at Vienna's great general hospital, a Hungarian physician named Ignaz Semmelweis witnesses this tragedy firsthand. He sees women dying day after day, and he cannot rest without finding out why. Little does he know, his determination will spark a medical revolution and lead to his own personal tragedy.